like and subscribe. What is your worst experience with bad neighbors? We had some neighbors that used to leave their garbage out in plastic bags the night before garbage day, instead of putting it in a bin. Around here, that's just ringing the dinner bell for raccoons and other critters. Sure enough, come morning there's garbage strewn all over the neighborhood. What the raccoons and skunks didn't spread around, the wind picked up the slack. Some of the people on the street kindly approached the guy and asked him to put his garbage in a bin. He told them to go themselves. Thus began the garbage wars. Every morning of garbage day some people on my street would collect all the half-eaten and rotten trash from their lawns and toss it back into the dude's backyard. He would collect it, then dump it back on their lawns. Or cram it into their bushes. People started finding half-eaten burritos and candy wrappers in their mailboxes. The street started to look like a slum. Police were called. Health inspectors. City by law enforcement. Each side was calling in whatever authority they could muster to get their enemy in. The dude and his family, amazingly his wife seemed perfectly pleasant, lasted about 8 months then moved. Every once in a while I find a random margarine lid or piece of styrofoam in my hedge, and my mind goes back to those dark days of war. Edit, spelling. Thank you for your service. Apartment building. The upstairs neighbor's dog peed on their patio, and it dripped down onto me while I was sitting outside reading. I yelled and ran to shower, and when I texted them to ask them to take their dog out to pee in future they said it was not their dog, and it must have blown over from somewhere else. What? They were crackheads. They had 2 kids, were physically and verbally abusive to each other, and were hoarders on top of it. Called Child Protective Services and the police over and over, and was never taken seriously. They ended up burning down their apartment and caused thousands of dollars in damage to the rest of the apartment building because they were cooking meth. We had to move out, as did many others. The silver lining is that they finally got their kids taken away after that. Had one that would basically steal our mail and other stuff from our porch and yard. Caught her once to confront her, and she started yelling at me to stop attacking her, and tried to say I was stealing her stuff. Ended up with the police getting called and us filing a restraining order against her. Edit, a word. As a postal employee, you should have called the USPS. They don't around. Just straight up rednecks who wanted the full neighbor experience without putting in any effort themselves. It was like they'd moved from some hillbilly commune, where you could just demand things of your neighbors. Every day when I got home from school, the 3 youngest kids would bang on our door until we gave them snacks. One of them, when denied snacks, came back and broke our glass door with a hammer. They turned the shared side yard, legally ours but shared, because we weren't necessarily using it, into a lumber yard / playground, where they dug a massive pit for mud wrestling. No bull there, mud wrestling. The second oldest kid, 6 in total, had an old account air handling unit in the backyard that he was allowed to hit with a sledgehammer when he got angry. He got angry often, and at some pretty irregular hours. I ran into him at a bowling alley years after they moved away / got kicked out / went bankrupt. He had a tattoo across his chest that said Immortal Death in a black-red gradient. He also had giant scars all over his back, chest and arms. He said he woke up in the middle of the highway on Halloween night, all cut up. Who knows if that's true, but if it could happen to anyone, he was the guy. A few more redneck activities, because this comment is getting some attention. Lighting bottle rockets out of the tailpipe on their dad's truck. The youngest kid got stuck in the mud pit up to his head, and they couldn't get him out for hours. On rainy nights they used to put these rusty cots in the front yard and sleep in the rain. That one didn't even register as redneck, felt more like an Addams Family thing to do. They somehow got their hands on what looked like municipal park playground equipment, one of which was a steel slide about 2 stories tall. One of the younger kids took a bike up to the top of it and tried to ride down, but fell over backwards and smacked his head on the metal steps a few times. The mom watched him do it, and I specifically remember her saying he's gotta learn somehow after he fell. Edit, thanks for the awards, y'all. A bunch of things with my ding dong neighbor. She had a large dog that hated my older, smaller dog. One day her dog ran into my yard and bit my dog. She did apologize for this one. Did not happen again. Neighbor dumped her lawn clippings into my backyard. Had to ask her to stop and clean up her mess. She decided to build a fence. No survey. So I paid for a survey of my property. She started building her fence 3 feet over on my property. I had her stop and remove the fence. She was angry and never rebuilt it. I painted my house. She painted her house, same color. I bought a new car. She bought a new car, same color, same configuration. There's other minor stuff, but that's enough. Odd person. Very odd. You get a window made of glass, she gets a window made of glass. You get clock radio, she cannot afford clock radio. Great success. I lived in an apartment with lot of rotating tenants. An elderly lady moved in across the hall from me, promptly started hoarding. I started to figure it out when her deck/porch started to fill up with odds and ends furniture, including, but not limited to, a roll-top desk. She also yelled at me once for taking her key out of the front door and putting it in the mail slot. Anyway, after a couple of weeks I started to realize I had not seen her in a while and started to smell something real weird. Turns out she had died and no one knew about it for a week, hence the smell. Her family came and cleared out all her stuff about a week after that. This is Wisconsin in the winter, and I had my good Doc Martin work boots outside my door because they were wet. They used one of my boots to prop open their door while they moved out and then stole them when they were done. My neighbor once shot both my dogs and his goat and made me bury both. One dog survived, thankfully. He then tried to make us pay for a new goat, claiming that our dogs attacked it. The goat had bullet wounds and no bite marks. The doodler is a psychopath. My mom has a neighbor who literally looks through her window to try to see into the house. She's had to call the cops on her multiple times. My first instinct is to spray the neighbor with water in the face, like training a dog. He lived in the apartment right below my husband and I. It went from constant complaints to him calling the cops on us multiple times to him leaving threatening message on our car and front door. When we first moved in, he was upset with the landlord for renting above him, left plenty of unpleasant notes, and interrupted quite a few times when we were talking to the landlord. When we moved in, we only had a mattress and no other furniture, but he kept calling the landlord saying that we were moving furniture around at 2 AM and had our TV at full blast. After the 8th complaint and 2 months of us still moving around furniture and TV being too loud, we finally showed our apartment to the landlord. We literally didn't have a TV and still only had out mattress. Then the neighbor started leaving notes on our car telling us to keep it down, and he even put in writing there needs to be no noise after 10 PM or else I'll call the cops. We usually didn't even get home until after 11 PM, and we were respectful to make sure we kept things down because we knew that not everyone had our work schedule. So we tried keeping it down even more, and there were so many instances when we'd be eating dinner or cuddling quietly or even sleeping, and he'd be banging on his ceiling/our floor. After a few months he started calling the cops, and it got to the point where even the cops told him to stop calling about a noise complaint because it's a landlord issue, and every time they came they never heard anything. The last time they showed up I was asleep and my husband ended up talking to them and explaining everything. They suggested that we file a harassment complaint. Then the cops showed up at the coffee shop I worked at the time and explained that they were getting almost nightly calls, and they suggested to me too that we should file a harassment complaint against the neighbor. Then he started leaving threatening notes on our car and front door, and we kept hearing our doorknob jiggle. He claimed that he and a friend had sat outside our apartment for 2 hours and listened to all the noise we were making. He's a retired cop and will call in a few favors if we continue making noise. He knows where we park our car, so we better start parking it somewhere else if we didn't want it to get damaged, etc. We kept the notes and made copies for the landlord and let him know that this was what we were dealing with, so we are just keeping him in the loop before Started getting real lacquer, we're tired of this, and if an old guy gets his rock then just know that it's been a long time coming. The last complaint was when he ran outside to the landlord screaming that something needed to be done about us because he heard our bed squeak the night before, and how dare he rent to some crazy college kids who are partying and having sex all night. The landlord finally told him to off and stop being a bitter old man. Then the neighbor took a total 180 and we found out that he had decided to sue the landlord and was moving. Suddenly the neighbor kept offering us rides when one of us were walking. He stopped complaining and leaving notes, but our doorknob kept jiggling and turning at around midnight, and whenever we would check on our door we'd hear someone running down the hall as we'd approach our door. He eventually moved away, and shockingly we haven't gotten a complaint from any other neighbor in the last 3 years we've lived here. The first apartment I lived in, I had a neighbor that would try opening the door. Didn't hear it myself because I worked nights, but I came home early one night around 2 AM and he was trying to get. Had a huge argument with him and he stopped doing it after that. I'm guessing he thought it was just my 2 female roommates living there because he never tried anything after he knew I was there as well. Kinda opened my eyes at the time to the sort of women have to deal with. We rented a house that had another apartment in the basement. The lady who lived below us kept to herself for the most part, so we didn't see her much. Part of our rental was a detached garage and she asked if she could put small deep freezer in our garage. We were using it for storage, so we were fine with it. After a couple weeks of having her freezer in there, it somehow got unplugged and she came unglued on us and wanted us to pay to replace everything. I understood her frustration, but we hardly ever went into the garage, since it was only for storage. In other words, we definitely didn't unplug it, and our landlord agreed. But she was edition. She had a son in college, who came home for the summer. During that summer he found a cat, and brought it home. His mom said no cats inside, so he would feed the kitten outside. She was pretty wild. He left for school again in the fall and we noticed that the cat was getting very thin. We started feeding her outside in her usual spot. Around Christmas we bought a bag of cat food, and I made a plate of cookies, and left them both at our neighbor's front door. The next day they were both back on our porch. Rude. Whatever. We continued to feed the cat, because she obviously wasn't feeding her. A few weeks later the cat came to our door crying. She was trying to come inside. Super weird considering she was pretty wild, and we had never let her inside before. I let her in, and noticed she was pregnant, and for sure about to have babies. I made her a little corner, and she had babies the next day. We let her stay in the house with us, but we knew we couldn't keep her. I went downstairs to talk to our neighbor. She said that her son's cat was a boy, so the cat we had obviously wasn't his. I posted on Facebook to see if anyone was interested in fostering a cat and her kittens, because we couldn't keep her. Her son saw my post on Facebook and got super mad at his mom. She then called the cops and said that I stole her cat and lied to her when she confronted me about having the cat in my possession. It was the stupidest, most frustrating thing that had ever happened to me as far as neighbors go. Edit/update. Didn't mean to leave you wanting more, honestly didn't think people would care so much about the story. The police called animal control, who then contacted us. They asked us to take the cat and her kittens to the shelter, so that if our neighbor really wanted the cats she would have to pay the fee as well as get her vaccinated and licensed. We did take them to the shelter, and as far as I know, she did pay the fees to pick her up. However, I did see her on the animal shelter's Facebook adoption page not long after that. Poor baby. For the record, I was heartbroken to have to take her to the shelter. I felt awful for moving her and her babies around like that. I'm sure that she was so anxious and scared. We would have tried to keep her, but we were moving to a new place that same week, hence the urgency to find her a foster home, and we weren't allowed to have pets. All authorities involved thought that she was nuts, and I think they were also frustrated to have to deal with this stupid situation. I used to live in a horrible apartment with paper-thin walls. The people next door were a woman who looked like she was in her 70s and what I thought was her 30-something grandson. They would yell at each other all day, constantly blast their TV, and the smell of their cigarette smoke would waft through into my apartment and make the place absolutely reek. The worst was at night when the two of them would have loud sex, which is how I figured out they weren't related. Every night for an hour, creaking bed banging against my bedroom wall and the old woman moaning like a stuck pig. Nightmarish. I also think the guy kept track of my schedule and watched for me, because whenever I came home or went out, even when I took out the garbage, he would be there outside his place, trying to chit-chat with me while staring at my body and being completely gross. Lived there a year, but it felt like 10. They could still be related. The block of flats I used to live in was being converted into Airbnb rooms by the landlord. Me and my wife, were the last residential tenants renting there out of the 14 flats. It was unstaffed, so 99% of the time the rooms were booked by in-call escorts, prostitutes, and drug dealers. For a solid week we had dealers in and out the door up and down the adjoining stairwell every 30 minutes. One night we saw a black sub pull up near the front of the property and try to bundle one of the women who was staying in the dealer room opposite ours. She managed to get away. We called the police as we were scared for her safety. They ended up getting a warrant as we told them of our suspicions, and when tallied up with the attempted bundling, the duty sergeant was happy to bust their door in, search the lot of them and made arrests. The other adjoining room/flat had a couple staying in it, got a bit drunk as you do, and we heard them arguing, and it getting heated, and at one point some sort of physical violence occurred. Police came again, told the guy to leave, and not to return. But he did come back, shouted at her threatening to stab her. A short while later we heard the most terrifying blood-curdling scream, and called police again. He went round the back of the property, got in a car, and sped off moments before the police turned up. The final tale was literally on my day off, hearing a knock at the flat's bottom door either every half hour or hourly. Saw Johns with their cash waiting to come up and get their end away with a prostitute who stayed for a few nights in the adjoining flat, the drug grade one. John would then leave. Not even 5 minutes later she was on to the next one and I heard everything. Walls were horrifically thin. I hated that place, but it was that or homelessness. We've now lived in our forever home, a nice bungalow in the countryside, for the last year, and the leave and quiet has been a godsend. You live through 3 episodes of CSI in a week. I have a schizophrenic neighbor that has believed for years that I'm hacking his electronic devices, scanning his phone, harassing/terrorizing him, etc. Over the years he has claimed I've held an old man hostage in my condo, allowed blood to drip from my patio to his, and that I'm a terrible racist. He leaves notes on the inside of his car accusing me of these things. Dude pretended to be a reverend, but was actually just a filthy hoarder. He insisted on wearing sandals all of the time, and whenever he left his flat, the entire stairwell would stink of century-old unwashed feet. Eventually, the beetles that had infested his flat crawled up and into our kitchen and then everywhere. Took months to get him evicted. That guy lived in a small apartment and my neighbors always cranked up their music to 11. Like loud. And until something like 7 AM. Maybe later, but that's when I would leave for work. It was so loud that I couldn't hear my own TV over it. My neighbors and I would bang on the door, but they would never open the door. It was like trying to sleep at a festival. Then at some point I found out they often left for a bar across the street, but would just leave the music on. So I would pull the breaker for their apartment, but they would just come back at 5 AM and turn it back on. It was reported by heaps of people, but nothing was ever done. So at some point I would jam their lock when they went out, so their keys wouldn't work anymore, and they had to get the property manager in while the music was blasting inside. After a couple of times of that happening they were evicted. Maybe I'm the bad neighbor in this story. I have posted this before. Our neighbor was tossing bags of her vomit into my yard for about a year. Like 50 bags. Called the cops. Turns out she had an eating disorder she was hiding from her parents. Edit. Seems like I sparked a bit of a eating disorder group therapy. Having witnessed just how far someone will go to hit their disorder, I hope this post and my past story can help one person get out before they go this far. Be strong. Be better. My neighbors create this toxic smoke out of their chimney. We suspect that they are making drugs. Does it smell like meth? Edit. For those asking what it smells like, Dominant, stop reading to ask what it smells like, because your question is about to be answered. I have described and linked to what it smells like. If so, that can be really dangerous for you. The whole can explode. A home where meth is produced is likely to have a strong chemical odor as a result of the ammonia and other chemicals used to produce it. Some people describe meth as smelling like window cleaner, rotten eggs or cat urine. Odd behavior, such as residents who rarely come outside or people who burn or haul away trash, can indicate a meth lab. Residents may also appear paranoid, have frequent visitors, or keep curtains drawn at all times. Meth production is dangerous, so if you suspect there is a meth house in your neighborhood, it is important to alert law enforcement and never approach the house yourself. Link to more examples and definitions. https://www. thecovervillage.com/methaddiction/methsmell/. I got along fine with my neighbors for 3 years, a mother and her adult son. They were both nice, but the son was very quiet. Sometimes he'd say hey and other times he didn't seem to recognize me. I assumed he was a recovering addict and didn't want to intrude. What ended up catching me though was when I listed the house for sale and found a family who was excited to make an offer. They were coming for their third tour, so they could show it to their extended family. Apparently during this tour, the son scaled onto my patio, which is a feat in itself, and pounded on the back door and windows screaming at them to get out. He managed to break one of the windows before they cleared the property and called the police. When they contacted me, I learned he was schizophrenic and had a considerable history of violent outbursts, including attempting to stab family members. Apparently he thought I had stolen the house from its rightful owner and was trying to sell it behind their back. To his credit though, he referred to me as a bodybuilder, which I didn't hate. The family decided not to make an offer and I ended up having to pull it from the market. My favorite part is, to his credit, if someone's going to break into my home, they better have compliments at the I'm ready. Our current neighbors have 2 dogs they let out into their tiny backyard that borders our driveway. They never ever pick up the dog poop and it smells like. Also, one of the dogs freaks out when she sees us. They mow their lawn maybe 4 times a year. The grass gets so tall, it is taller than the smaller dog. We are putting up a privacy fence next week. I cannot wait. Probably our neighbors in our apartment that just let their dog bark all day long on their porch. Like I don't think that dog is ever inside even during the winter until it is nighttime. It is so annoying. Edit. Okay, they will bring the dog in when they are not home, which is like never, and when they go to bed, which again is like never, cause I have been woken up by them at 3 AM before. Why even have a dog if you refuse to spend any time with it, walk it or let it inside? Sounds like neglect at best, abuse at worst. Have you reported it? That's absolutely no life for a dog. Edit. You said until it's nighttime, so at least they do take it in at night. Still, leaving it outside on the porch all day long is ed up. Does it have adequate shelter, food and water? Do they take it for walks? Found out they had an elderly cat who couldn't chew properly, and that they kept her outside and gave her dry food despite her inability to chew it. Poor creature showed up in our yard a bit ago, nothing but skin and bones. Soaked from sleeping in the rain, covered in fleas. Gave her some food and water. She's doing pretty alright now. I rented a flat with an ex and the upstairs neighbor was an absolute nightmare. Deadbeat dad who had his kid every weekend and left them screaming all the time. He'd blast music until sunrise every day, even when he had his kid. Got the council involved, nothing happened. Got child services involved, nothing happened. He used to argue every Sunday with his ex about how he wasn't paying child support. They'd argue right outside our door. We were on the ground floor. The guy was unemployed, owed the landlord a lot of money, and only left his flat to get groceries or drugs. He kicked off at me because my cat meowed loudly once. Lived in an apartment building with little better than paper 4 walls. You could clearly hear the next door neighbors' conversations, them having sex, walking up the stairs, etc. For some reason they thought it would be totally awesome to install a surround sound system and affix the speakers to our shared wall. Ito vertical bar was not awesome. It was so loud that it literally shook the wall, and we could not hear our own television unless we turned it up ridiculously loud in return. The neighbors did not respond kindly to our request that they place the speakers elsewhere, or at least turn the bass down. It ultimately ended with cops being called on them after the guy got being asked again to turn it down, and started pounding on the wall and screaming about how he was going to us up. They finally got evicted when he threatened someone at the management office on some other matter. Before he got evicted, though, we begged the office to let us move to a different apartment. Could not afford the lease breaking fee to just leave, and they did let us move to another building. Vertical bar, and our new neighbors had a parrot that never shut the up, and a special needs child who would literally spend hours banging on their piano screaming/singing "My name is Amanda." What can one do in that situation, except grin and bear it, I guess. Once our lease was up, I was so I'm glad to leave that apartment complex. Some noise is expected in apartment buildings. I have certainly lived in other apartments, and was fine with the normal/expected amount of noise, but when there is zero sound insulation and you have neighbors that do not give a it sucks pretty bad. Moved into a crappy apartment in a building that was occupied by basically the worst people in the area. Pretty rural small town. Junkies, alcoholics, etc. I moved there because I do not have a driver's license, and I needed to live close to my new job at a cafe. No buses in the area, except school buses, and it was relatively cheap. Anyways, one night when I came home from work, I met 2 of my neighbors by the entrance to the building. These 2 were living wall to wall with me, and I had listened to their drugged up Saturnalias more than once. They started following me up the stairs, not saying a single word, just following me. I rush inside and lock the door when they start hammering at it. Yelling, hammering their hands at the door so hard I thought they would break it. I yelled back at them, "Whatever do you want? Leave me alone." They stopped their hammering, and the man said, with a fragile voice, "We were just wondering if we could borrow your pee for a drug test tomorrow." I not so politely declined, told them to off, and called the police. Did not live there for much longer, I'll tell you that. Guy owned 6 cars, and kept them all parked on the street in a very congested block of apartments. Spent hours tending to them, and they somehow always looked rustier when he was done. If a leaf landed on one of his cars, he would accuse the neighborhood of intentionally placing leaves on his car to annoy him. My neighbors have fights in the street. Same, but mine was fun to watch. Imagine 2 of the largest women you ever seen go at high speed. It was the best thing I ever saw as a 10-year-old. When my wife and I moved into our house in the summer of 2019, the neighbors on either side of us warned us about the people renting the house directly behind ours. Apparently they had been known to cause trouble and blow things way out of proportion, bordering on paranoia of everyone around them. We kept it in mind, but had no issues for the first 6 months or so after moving in. Their house sits on a hill behind ours, and so overlooks the majority of our backyard due to the elevation change. Well, one morning, technically, at about 3 AM we wake up to ring notifications from our phones showing video from our front doorbell. There is a man standing barefoot in a sleeveless shirt on our porch pounding on our front door. We give it 2 to 3 minutes just watching him on the app, thinking maybe Halo's drunk and has the wrong voice. Vertical bar, essentially giving him the benefit of the doubt. But then we start to hear him say, "Come out you. I am gonna you up etc. And he leaves the porch and starts to head around the side of the house towards our backyard. Considering we had no idea who this was, my wife now immediately calls the police as I move out of our bedroom towards the external doors to look/listen for any attempt of home invasion. At this point our neighbors directly behind us throw a huge spotlight into our backyard from this. We're all thinking okay cool, they know something is up, and they're trying to help us out by shedding light on our backyard. The cops arrive several long minutes later and knock. We explain the situation, and they head out back to look around and get the scoop from the neighbors with the spotlight. It turns out that the spotlight neighbor was the one on our porch. He had jumped our fence into our backyard and up into his yard and then threw the light on. He told the police that several nights prior, I had let my puppy out into my own backyard in the middle of the night, and because I was in my boxers, that I was trying to expose myself to his family because they could look down on our entire yard from where this sits. He then followed this up to the police with evidence which consisted of videos he had taken through our windows of my wife and I inside of our own home doing totally normal things like chores, watching TV, etc. Nothing inappropriate or scandalous, not that it would have mattered anyway, we were in our own home. Because of the elevation difference, if they went out of their way they could technically slightly see through our closed blinds due to the anglo vertical bar, so they had been filming us for no reason at all, and expected the police to see this as reasonable? The cops came back in, and my wife was devastated, a huge breach of our privacy of course and totally unfounded accusations as we had never done anything to anger these people, we had not even met them. The police told us just don't worry about it, if he tries something again just give us a call, which was not the most comforting at the time. They moved out a few months later without any additional issues. My wife and I celebrated like it was a holiday when we saw the moving van in their driveway. Shared a split house with a couple, them upstairs us downstairs. They said they knew that the noise insulation was low and asked us to let them know if it was ever too loud. We texted maybe 10 times to turn down their TV at 3 AM directly over our bedroom during weekdays over the course of 2 years. On the final time, they snapped back how hard it was for them and how hard they tried to please us with the situation and how they even stopped using their surround sound system in their 500 SQ/FD unit at 3 AM. On top of this they constantly moved, and on one occasion broke our stuff in the basement storage to the point we eventually stopped using it, frequently put shoes in the new dryer to the point it melted, rubber on the back, broke said dryer by overstuffing it, and leaning heavy equipment against the door so it had stopped popping open, accidentally stole packages from us on several occasions, and filled up the other shared space we had with their own stuff so we couldn't use it. I lived in a small building that housed 5 apartments years ago, and one day a Fred Durst lookalike moved in with his wife and daughter. I like to keep to myself, but I could hear them having trouble moving their things inside, so I offered to help. They seemed really nice that first day. I'll list off some of what happened in no particular order, since it all jumbled together over the years with how common it was. / discount Fred Durst would play Cody at all hours of the night completely faced, which wouldn't bother me at all, but the walls were worse than paper and there wasn't a single night he didn't end up screeching racial slurs, and I don't mean sentences, I mean just the individual words screamed repeatedly. On more than a few nights he had enlightened moments, and in between the curses and insults I heard him scream things like "Why doesn't anyone like me?" which was *GOLDEN*. Despite the last point, they would call in noise complaints every single month. I worked night shift and I would get annoying messages from the landlord about how I was apparently blasting music or having parties when I was working and no one was home. / they would order food from 2 different places, so they would have twice the chance of a fast order and just tell the other one to off, you were too slow. One delivery woman heard my roommate and I in the living room close to the entryway after it happened one time, and she walked right up to our door and said, "Wow, that guy sure has a small penis." 2010s loved that lady. / multiple police visits over the years for Florida man tier craziness. One time I saw about 4 to 5 cops come in the entryway, and I guess from what I had heard his wife went downtown and assaulted another woman, and even though I assume people on scene were doing their due diligence, Fred called the cops to his own house and told them to go arrest her. When I started my first job post-college, I was thrilled to live by myself for the first time in my life. I had this beautiful one-bedroom apartment in a solid part of town. Everything was great until 6 months later, when new tenants moved in next to my unit. I had a package go missing, a phone case. Amazon had posted a photo of it at my door, so I thought that it was just a fluke. Then it happened again, and again, and again. The office would not accept packages, so I had to get my items delivered to free and so places instead. Overall wildly inconvenient, and the police did not care in the slightest when I reported it, so I just figured I'd deal with it. Fast forward a few weeks, and I come home, after being gone for less than an hour, to see that my door knob in front door was scrapped up, and the knob was barely hanging on. Long story short, I had been parking in plain view of this guy's window, so he was able to tell when I was home. I'm 100% convinced he tried to break into my place, and that me coming home early interrupted him. I googled his name after I moved. I got it off a package at his door, and found that he was a convicted felon with charges that include grand theft auto, domestic assault, drug dealing, and an attempted break-in. I have a few from the same neighbor who I'll call Linda. Linda would often have men outside the apartment building that she locked out screaming her name. But the best story regards a boyfriend Linda had who insisted my roommate and I call him the captain. About a week after meeting him, we came home to a wedding announcement for Linda and the captain. Yes, his name was the captain on the announcement. Exactly 1 week later still, the captain was arrested outside our apartment building for public intoxication at 2 AM, while screaming, "I've made a huge mistake. You Linda. A huge mistake. I'm ruined." Arsehole neighbors from my building let a robber into a guy's apartment. He was home and almost killed the guy. Definitely the head 19-year-olds that lived next door to me when I was finishing up college, that screamed at Call of Duty at the top of their lungs through paper-thin walls every night when they got killed, who also threw a pumpkin on the roof of my car, causing $3K worth of damage, which is considered felony vandalism in Michigan. I finally got them to confess, and basically gave him a stern talking to as a 22-year-old that was just done with college nonsense at that point, and told him I wasn't going to press charges as long as his insurance paid for it. Later that year, when his roommate was flipping out about Cody and yelled something along the lines of "God, it, I'm hackers, everyone is, I'm cheating, what the is this bull? I hate this game, bunch of I'm losers and cheaters," which was very clear through my bedroom wall while I was studying, so I didn't hesitate, since it had been months of that, after he got done with his tantrum and said, "Sounds like you just suck at Cody, bro." I heard a crash of what sounded like a controller being banished to the shadow realm, and then didn't hear anything from him for a month. It was glorious. I was in the burbs. There was a house that let their dog bark all day, another house would party until 3 AM, and the people living behind us would throw their dirty diapers into our backyard. The party house and the dog barking house made me miss so much work. Nothing like calling your boss and saying I can't drive to work because in the last 3 days I have had 4 hours sleep. Buckle up kids, this one is fun. When I was growing up, my rear neighbor, Janet, and my mom were both going through rough divorces at the same time. My mom mostly kept to herself at first. Janet did not take that approach. At first it seemed frustrating but reasonable. We had dogs and a fenced-in yard in the suburbs. One day the dogs were left outside and barked too long. Janet filed a noise complaint. Then she started filing noise complaints anytime she saw the dogs outside. Then my mom started keeping them inside more. Then Janet filed complaints when she could hear the dogs barking inside, or when she heard someone else's dogs, or really, just whenever she felt like it, because this wasn't about the noise, it was about Janet feeling a sense of control over something during an out of control divorce. Eventually, the cops must have told Janet she had to stop calling them, so she started calling animal control instead. The cops had, we presume, told her that she was at risk of a criminal charge for abusing police services, but animal control had no such protections. They had to come out when someone filed a loose animal report. It got to the point where animal control knew what was happening and would come to our door to make small talk with my mom just to file their report. They told her though that, as long as the calls happened, they had to at least come out. Then my mom had a feather-brained idea. Whenever animal control showed up, my mom would buy a 2-pack of lawn flamingos and put them in our yard. She was a teacher, so she got up early. When she did, she would take the flamingos and make them stare at Janet's front door. Then she would get home earlier than Janet and move them around just like normal decor. Whenever Janet made a call, my mom bought more flamingos. And whenever Janet made a call, a bigger and bigger flock of lawn flamingos stared her down the day after she left for work, but would be casually mingling when she got home. I can only imagine what she must have thought. One would have to think she questioned her sanity, both because of the movement and the incremental growth. But by the time it got to 12 or so lawn flamingos giving her the 100-yard glare, she made the connection. Janet never called animal control again after that. She ed my husband while I was in the hospital giving birth to our daughter. I used to live in a house that was split into 2 apartments. My neighbors had a lower half, and I learned we had issues with the HVAC when their cigarette smoke came visibly pouring out our registers, stank up everything we owned. Then one of them stole my car. They had a small dog that had an annoying high-pitched bark that wouldn't shut up day or night. It was on the same side as our bedroom. We asked nicely, and they did nothing. We finally called the cops and animal control. Nobody helped. Dude had just moved in across the street and threw a housewarming party. Loud music all night until the cops were called and shut it down. Finally got to bed around 2 a.m. Woke up at 3:30 a.m. to this asshole going door to door demanding to know if it was the person living there who called the cops. You've been visited by the ghost of a very important man. Pay your respects by liking and subscribing, and he'll grant you 3 weeks of good luck.